Okay, in this mini lecture, we're going to talk about ways that you can organize your persuasive speech. Remember, we've already talked about the appeals that we're going to use with persuasion, including logos, ethos, and pathos. Now, when we speak to persuade, we are attempting to create, reinforce, or change the attitudes, beliefs, values, or behaviors of the listener. Now, persuasive speech can be a little bit like an informative speech, but with the informative speech, you were a teacher. In the persuasive speech, you are a leader. In your central idea, you're going to say, I want to convince or persuade my audience, and then fill in the blanks. If we look at the focus of persuasion, we could be looking at a few different types of questions. It could be a question of fact. With this, something is either true or false. I want to persuade my audience that TV violence causes real-world violence. It could be a question of value. With a question of value, you're saying that something is either good or bad, right or wrong. So you could try to convince your audience that Pepsi is better than Coke. And finally, you could have a question of policy. With a question of policy, you are advocating that some action should be taken. So, if your central idea could be to persuade my audience that they should donate blood. This is an action that you want your audience to take. When we look at influencing your audience, there are some things that you need to keep in mind. How you structure your persuasive speech, which is your speech organization, is crucial to its level of effectiveness. If you are not well organized, just as it was with the informative speech, your audience is not going to be persuaded. They will have a difficult time following your speech. Audience analysis is crucial so that you can organize your speech in an effective way. Who is your audience that you're talking to? For this class and for this speech, we know that we have a very general audience, so we want to keep that in mind as we organize our speech. Remember, when wanting to influence your audience, generally change works best in small amounts over a long period of time. Think about yourself. When you, let's say that you're trying to implement a exercise program. If I were to try to convince you that you should start running 10 miles every day of the week, you might look at me and say, well, you're crazy. But if I said this is something you could build up to, or even if you did something small every day and build up to, that would be a little bit easier for your audience to accept. And finally, you must make the audience understand the significance of the problem through the use of credible information, emotional appeals, and your own credibility. If your audience doesn't recognize that there's a problem, any solution you offer would be irrelevant. So let's take a look at some ways to organize your persuasive speech. Now, in the past, I have limited the organization to just a problem solution, but we're now going to kind of expand this a little bit. And it is not that there is one better way or best way to organize your speech. It depends on your topic and the information that you have and the position that you're taking. So you have three options: the problem solution, the comparative advantage, and the statement of reason. Now, there will be PowerPoints that are going to be specifically addressing each one of these, but let me just give you a small overview right now. The problem solution strategy works best if an audience doesn't realize that a problem exists, and the speaker is going to introduce the problem and leads the audience to the solution. With a comparative advantage, this is going to work best when an audience is unclear about which option is best. You're going to take perhaps two things and compare them and advocate for one being better than the other. And finally, with a statement of reason, this design is best for audiences who believe in and maybe even slightly agree with the topic or position, but they need more justification for taking on the intended solution. This is going to be set up very similarly to an informative speech where you're going to have the main points as your reasons. The speaker is going to introduce the statement to agree with and then systematically give all the reasons in its support. Now, remember, I said that there is a PowerPoint and a mini lecture that's going to be addressed for each one of these organizational patterns, so this is just a very short overview. Now, when organizing your persuasive speech, regardless of what organization pattern you choose to use, your topic and your central idea is going to determine the organizational pattern that makes the most sense for your speech. And again, whichever organizational pattern you use, you are still going to have an introduction that will have all the pieces that were in your informative speech. You will have a conclusion that will, of course, include a summary, some call to action, some audience takeaway, and then some memorable closer. Transitions are absolutely critical in all speeches, but is going to be particularly important with the persuasive speech. And of course, you must orally cite your sources, which helps to increase your credibility as a speaker. So again, and you're going to hear this a lot so that I can reinforce this. With the introduction, an attention getter, that is the first thing you're going to use. You can use a narrative or a story, perhaps startling statistics, an example, a dramatic quote. You need to establish audience relevance. Why in the world should this audience care about this topic? Your own credibility will begin to be established in the introduction. How or why are you credible about this topic or issue? And also, why do you care about this topic or issue? If you can't convince us that you care, it will be difficult to get us to care. And finally, you're going to briefly describe the main points of your speech. If it's a problem solution, you would identify that. If with a comparative advantage, you're going to identify to us in the introduction what you're going to be comparing on what issues. And with the statement of reason, you're going to tell us what your main points are. So again, any introduction you want to preview, tell us what you're going to tell us, then in the body, tell us, and then finally in the conclusion, you're going to tell us again. This reinforces the speech message, remembering that we process information differently that we hear than we do that we read. The conclusion, absolutely, you will have a summary. You're going to review what your main points were, the problems, the solution, the specific action you wanted people to take. And then that call to action. What do you want us to do, think, feel, or believe? Why did we listen to this speech? And finally, some memorable closer. Don't just leave us hanging. Remember, no one's Porky Pig. We're not going to say that's all, folks. Transition statements must be used throughout the speech to help guide the audience. Additionally, internal summaries and previews with the transitions are very, very helpful to help the audience follow the speech. And sources must be orally cited throughout the speech with enough information so that the audience can judge the credibility of the information. And let me remind you one more time about these persuasive appeals. We have logos, ethos, pathos. Logos, credibility of your information. This is the organization of your speech, the ability to guide the audience through your speech. All of these factors help increase your logos. Ethos is your credibility as a speaker, your connection to your topic, the conviction of your delivery. If we can't establish that you're credible and passionate about your topic, you're not going to make the audience feel that way. And finally, pathos. This is the emotional connection by your audience. Use of stories, anecdotes, or examples. Also, use of vivid language can help with this. You want to connect the audience's heart through words and delivery. And those are some tips for organizing your speech. There will be individual mini lectures, as I said, for each of the 3 organizational strategies that you may use for this speech.